Welcome to Proudly Out of Line. I'm Mardi Moore, an old school dyke and the CEO of Boulder-based Rocky Mountain Equality. With everything going on around us in this world right now, it's the perfect time for all of us to be engaged, informed, and hopefully have a little fun along the way. On with the show. And on with the show it is. My head is about to explode because I'm joined today by Alok, who will be in Boulder, of all places, on September 28th at 7 p.m. at the Boulder Theater. Only a few tickets left, so make sure you head on over there today to get them. And when this podcast is done, you're going to wish you bought 2 tickets. So on that, welcome to Proudly Out of Line with Mardi Moore. Alok, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh my God, what an honor. What an honor. I got so excited when I saw you coming, as did all my staff. And I had a random creative moment and reached out, and much to my surprise, here you are. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Alok, in listening to the many podcasts that you have been on, the writings that you have done, I wonder if you could give us, just to a new listener who might not know who you are, when I say, oh, Alok's coming, they're like, I'm not sure if I know who that is. And then I show them a picture and they go, I know who that is. But for a listener who doesn't have your beautiful being in front of them today, might you describe yourself to somebody just meeting you for the first time?
Yeah, I would say that I am someone who believes that the art of dreaming shouldn't just be there when we're sleeping. And I'm trying to do my best to dream while I'm awake and to remember that daydreaming is an essential ingredient to having a good life. I would say that I'm in love with imagination. That's been the most sustained relationship I've ever had my entire life. And it's where I spend most of my time. And in that imagination, what I've come to believe is that the purpose of being alive is to do as flowers do, which is to serve a look and then die, really nothing more. And so just to commit ourselves to elegance and glamour and celebration and joy. And so I'm trying to do as flowers do, to not be embarrassed of my blooming, to understand the painstaking stakes of beauty, and to make my presence on earth known as someone who didn't dare diminish their own shine.
Wow. That's a picture that I will carry in my mind. Thank you so much for that. You already touched on something that I really appreciate that you say, that I've heard in a few of your podcasts, around that once we understand that we're all going to die, like the flower you just described, what do you do while you're here? And I know it's easy for me to get wrapped up in the day, in the moment, and not find the joy in it, and to head down a dark hole. So I just came out of a meeting. I'm like, oh my God, that was terrible. And I'm like carrying it over and over in my head. And then I knew I was going to get to talk to you. And what popped up is, Marty, you're going to die. What you going to do with that?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any techniques that help you? I mean, your voice helped me get back to that. What's the voice when you end up in moments that aren't full of joy, or where you can get, I can't imagine how many people you have to deal with and how many conversations you're negotiating. Do you ever feel like you're starting to fall down a dark hole, even with your philosophy and your way of being? And
Mm-hmm.
if so, how do you get yourself back to even and shining?
Mm-hmm. What I would say is that joy isn't about undermining sorrow. Sorrow is a fundamental way of showing up in the world. Sorrow suggests to us that we care. And I think it's really important to care, especially in a world right now where so many people are invested in us, becoming numb to our pain and the pain of other people. To feel grief and to have an intimate relationship with grief and pain and the empathy that requires feels very important. What I would say is that joy is about recognizing that even the ability to have sorrow is joyous, because the alternative, which is machinery, soullessness, the mechanical function of a body, not having a heart or lungs. That's an alternative that we don't want. So what I would say is take joy that you have the ability to feel, um, because there's many people in the world who don't have that, and it's I think perhaps the gnarliest part of being human. Andrea Gibson, who I know is from the region, always used to say the ethereal spirits are jealous of our fleshy embodiment because they're probably looking at us being like, oh my gosh, what does sadness feel like? And I think we forget sometimes how special it is to feel. And in fact, that our bodies have these kind of primordial orchestral arrangements to every emotion. Like sadness feels a certain way in our body. Why would we deny our body that ability to sing that note? So it's just about witnessing it and accepting it. And what you find is that once you accept the pain and the suffering, rather than judging it, admonishing it, trying to exile it, then it passes quicker. It's there because it wants to be noticed for a reason.
Wow. Thank you. You touched on something that I've been struggling with in my mind, which you talk a lot about compassion. But you just brought up a word, and I've even Googled it, but I need you to help me in this understanding of empathy and compassion. Can you let me know what you think about the connection or maybe even the separateness of those two words?
Mhm. So the biggest ruse, the biggest lie, the biggest fairy tale that we're told is that you and I are different, which just actually makes no sense. Separation is a lie, and any political imagination, any language that rehashes the idea of irreconcilable difference is something that I will always protest to, because you and I, quite frankly, are humans, regrettably, really, these days. But that's what we are. And compassion and empathy are both compasses that take us back to that fundamental truth, that help us see outside of whatever mirage this is that divides us on the basis of race and class and gender and all these arbitrary lines that hold us back from true meaning. And it reminds us that actually, if someone in the world is experiencing suffering, that's a part of me too. So, from that framework, a thing like grief and a thing like depression are not individual experiences, they're collective responsibilities. So, the way that we show up for each other is not out of an idea of allyship, which says it's these people who are experiencing this injustice and I'm showing up. It's if there is injustice in the world, that is poisoning the well that I also draw water from. That's impacting a piece of me. And this means that we also have to apply this even to people who we might see as enemies or as people we're against. I'm not against people. I'm against systems. I actually am not in the business of villainizing individuals. I think that that's a distraction. I think that within each of the people that I judge is something in me too. And so then I ask myself, how did I not become like that? And I became not like that because I was shown compassion and empathy, this greater love song. I had people in my life who held space for me when I hated myself. I had people in my life who believed in me, who allowed me to get it wrong, who allowed me to mess up, who had the grace and the dignity to keep showing up even when I messed up. And so when I look at my own biography, I'm like, oh, okay, the way that I didn't really find hatred to be a seductive force is because I had something more compelling, right? The reason that people default to hatred and prejudice is because it fulfills a psychological function. Left to their own devices, people wouldn't do that. There's really no point in it. It kind of shortens your life and makes your time on earth kind of miserable. But the reason people default to hatred and to prejudice is because they give a sense of belonging and a sense of community and a sense of identity. And the way that I was able to get a stronger sense of identity, belonging, and community was through love. So I would say compassion and empathy are really guideposts that take us back to this fundamental truth that love is not something we do, it's who we are. Um, I whenever I'm feeling despair, I really take a second to reflect that there's a million quiet mechanisms going on in my body that I'm not cognitively aware of that are trying to keep me alive. That's stunning. Wow. I had no idea that like my skin cared about me so much or my lungs cared about me so much, but they're rooting for me in this really fundamental and intrinsic way. And so too is our collective body. Like our job in the world is to be that lung, is to be that heart, is to be that fist for the entire world. And and so I would say that compassion and empathy are not political to me, meaning they're not things that we can choose to opt in or out of. They're things that we return to come back to, like a home. They're actually just the truth.
You paint such beautiful pictures with your words. I could just see like the little cartoon thing in my mind as you're talking about, my skin is rooting for me, my lungs are rooting for me. It's such a beautiful picture. Thank you. You touched a little bit on something that when I think about the LGBT movement, so, I'm old dyke, your auntie, I came out before AIDS was called AIDS. I went to services for a lot of gay men my age in the 80s in Houston, Texas. And then I got to Seattle, Washington, where I lived, and your auntie showed up with the sign um, at one of George Bush's events, and it changed my life because I saw that one person could change the world. And I have chills saying that because Urvashi really did change my life. The bravery, which I see must be passed down in families. Um, but in thinking about that, in the fact that in my lifetime, that identity politics have been such a place for the larger LGBTQ movement to play in, to move policies forward, to fight for equality. But as I'm watching the pendulum swing and trying to figure out how we keep it from going so far over that they wipe out our existence, I wonder if identity politics is where we're supposed to be right now. Your thoughts?
Mhm. Well, I think it's important in light of Orvish's legacy to remember that every political idea has a history. And the way that identity politics was first conceived of is not the way that it's being practiced now. So the way that identity politics really surfaces is from Black feminists who were very invested in critiquing systems. It wasn't just about a representation politics of saying, oh, if we become the people in charge, then we will have freedom. It's about challenging the idea of authority itself and imagining a different way to be. And it was also a response to the erasure of women, of Black people, of queer people from many social movements who were organizing around ideas like the worker or the laborer without paying attention to the factory not being the only site where people were experiencing discrimination. The way that it's become now is an idea that if you have the correct identities, then you are virtuous. And if you have the incorrect identities, then you are vile. And it was never meant to collapse entire structures and systems on individuals, nor meant to say that identity is prophecy. That if you are this particular way, we know what the future holds. We know everything about you. Because actually, the really fun, cool, snarky part about life is that people continually disobey what they're expected to be. Some of the most beautiful dissenters to systems of oppression are also people who have benefited from them. So, what I am hearing in your question is actually, I don't know if it's identity politics that's to blame as much as it is representation politics. and fragmentation and increasingly polarization. Those feel like larger poisons than identity. And it feels like the identity politics scapegoating is there because in the ether is a suspicion of a lot of the intelligences produced by women and specifically women of color. So, in the same ways that things like critical race theory have been writ large demonized without actually attending to what that means, like the actual text, what they're saying, identity politics has become this thing that people just dismiss without actually sitting with what is it meaning to say and what were the people thinking. And I do think we have a real issue with representation politics. I think we do have a big issue where we've mistaken symbolic gains as material gains. And that's an issue that we learned from Urvashi. She was one of the first people to write about it in Virtual Equality. She said, we have pursued a movement that has pursued the kind of simulacrum or myth or mirage of equality that isn't actually felt by the majority of gay and lesbian people. And that was in the early 90s, she was saying that. So that's why I think it's really important to like learn from legacies. I know there's a concerted effort in this moment right now to like ban history, but there's a reason why. It's because when we actually read people in our community before, all of the things that we're dealing with right now, people were thinking about in the past and offered ways out. And one of the ways out that Urvashi really offered was there is no such thing as a queer issue because queer people are every issue. So she would say housing justice is queer justice, economic justice is queer justice. And that framework was not inherited as a mainstream imperative. It should have been. It should have been like one of the biggest takeaways from the HIV and AIDS crisis should have been, hey, what's failing here is not just homophobia, but systemic racism and poverty and healthcare access. And in order for us as queer people to be free, we've got to align with all these other movements. But that wasn't the case. We made a series of choices that thought, oh, if we just cohere ourselves around just gender and sexuality, that's how we'll win. But in fact, what we can learn from Urvashi's writing, from Audre Lorde's writing, from so many women of color, is that that's in fact how we lose. We lose by being in silos, and we win by building coalition.
Wow, thank you for all that. I'm so glad this is recorded so I can listen to it over and over again because there's so many different pieces in that. One of the things that we learned here at Rocky Mountain Equality during the COVID pandemic, and have put in place and continued to, we were doing some of it before, but COVID was wiping out not just LGBT people, but brown people and black people and disabled people. And we started a whole coalition and found the similarities between our identities and then doubled down on them. And we vaccinated so many people. One simple thing is undocumented folks often have an ID that doesn't match when they go to work than when they're at home. Same with trans people. And like, how do we have these conversations and build bridges? And those bridges are still built, and we were able to use them when MPOX came along, and as we continue working forward on things. But thank you for all that, and I just can't imagine what it'd be like sitting around the table with you and your auntie at a holiday having these kinds of conversations. Do you feel like you were so lucky with the family that you were given in this life?
Listen, my mom and I always say is each one of us has our own cross to bear. Yes, there were some ways in which it was really great, but also ways in which it was stifling. And I think that's why I'm an artist, is because it feels like in mainstream culture, there's only an ability to speak in either or. And in art, it was the first place that I met people who taught me both and so I feel so lucky. And there was a deep sense of burden of like, oh gosh, who do I want to be? How do I carve my own path when there's such great shadows around me? What is this what I want to do, or is this what I feel like I've been expected to do? And so, yeah, I think it's both and. What I will say is that having familial support fundamentally changes your life as a queer person. I would say that the greatest luxury I've ever had in my life is having familial support. Because at a fundamental level, the people who said that they loved me allowed me to change. And that's not something that many people have. And so I feel really lucky that Orvishi was partially responsible for that, kind of from even before I was able to speak, creating the conditions so that everyone who was in my family was ready for me as a queer person.
So great. I didn't know you two are related until Irv was sick for the last time, and then I put it together, and like my head just like exploded. I'm like, of course, Mardi Moore. Of course, they're connected. You mentioned a word just now, which was shadow. And when I was listening to one of your podcasts this weekend, uh, I wrote it down because I've experienced it, which is childhood casts a shadow
Mm-hmm.
on who we are. And in thinking, that's so big. Um, and it comes in all. We each have our own experience with what that shadow is and what we're either trying to outrun or get in alignment with, or however we work with our shadow. Um, and I know your story, parts of your story that you've been public about. Do shadows still show up in your life?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the experience of being an adult is walking through a haunted house of your own with so many weird halls of mirrors with distortions and so many weird sounds. You're like, where is that coming from? Is that my knee pain or my childhood trauma or both? Um, and we're all haunted by something. I don't think that there's a way to grow up in this world without haunting. But what I've learned about ghosts, just like sadness, is that the presence of the ghost isn't the issue. The issue is the refusal to listen to what's there. And so people mistake physiologically growing up as moving on from your childhood. And yeah, you might be years away, but it's still there. And until you really confront it and feel the things that you weren't allowed to feel when you were younger, those ghosts will continue to haunt. And so my diagnosis of a lot of what's wrong in the world is a lot of unprocessed childhood trauma. That's just basically what it is. And that's a really hopeful thing to say because that means we have things to do with it, you know? I had the opportunity on tour a couple of days ago to walk around with Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a leading expert on childhood trauma. And I just felt so giddy to meet with him because now, for the first time, my generation has access to doctors who understand the relationship between trauma and illness. That's something that wasn't there for a long time. For a long time, illness was just blamed on you, rather than that being a byproduct of growing up in places where you weren't safe. And I'm just so happy because the more that I learn about the psychology of trauma, the biology of trauma, the more hope I have that we can heal. The issue, though, is that people refuse to accept that they need a heal. So part of the way that that shadow works is a distancing, saying that happened in the past, it's over. But that's not what our bodies perceive. Our bodies don't perceive a before and after, a past or future. Trauma actually collapses the present, the past, and the future in one. And so when you don't heal something, it feels like it did at that time. And so there is a need for mass healing. And I've always felt like that feels like the most important thing in the world. And it just irritates me, I think, because the language of healing and wellness and trauma and emotion is feminized in our culture. It's not seen as rigorous and vital and emergency. So we keep on circumventing mental health and putting it on the side rather than actually understanding that mental health is the foundation of every issue that we care about. Because my belief is that if people were well, they would not be okay with the decimation of other people. The only way we can be okay with that is because there's a numbing and a cleaving of self that happens internally.
Mm. Thank you. Let's jump out of that for one moment. No, I'm going to stay right in it. So deep and so heavy and so good. is a question around historical trauma. So one step deeper and bigger, and that line that carries from generation to generation. I'm sure you've spent time thinking about that, probably even experienced some of it. Would you share your thoughts on that?
Hmm. I mean, I feel it all the time. I'm very close with my family, and I can trace the through line of where my anxiety comes from. I can see it modeled to me and my mom, and then modeled to me and her mom, and I can make those connections. Um, but I suppose what I think about historical trauma is that in order to heal it, you have to know what happened. And part of the trauma is that a lot of people are dispossessed of their history. So, what I would reframe a lot of the attacks on LGBTQ inclusive history, Black inclusive history, Indigenous history is preventing people from actually healing, because the only way we can heal is if we know. And I think when it comes to the experience of queer people, what is perhaps unique is that a lot of the records of what were done to us, we have not known. And it took me being a researcher and going into archives and learning that we used to be lobotomized, that we used to be thrown in mental health asylums, that we used to be non consensually experimented on in medical procedures, that we were marked for extermination by various forces, to really clarify what that tightness in my chest was and where it came from. Because what's different is when you have a family, you have testimony from an elder. Whereas often in queer community, we don't hear. And that makes our path kind of harder because we don't have the language to even articulate what the wound is. We know that there's something there, but we can't trace the history and the origin of it. And I suppose that's why I'm a big advocate for learning queer history and being a perpetual student of queer history, because the more that you learn, the more that you can heal. And the more you can understand how your presence is only capable because other people sacrificed a very great deal, a very, very great deal. And then that makes me proud, because I'm like, oh, I'm part of a legacy. Because that's the other thing. There's a lot of pain and suffering that's transmitted, but there's also a lot of chutzpah and strength and grit and verve that's also across the generation. So, in learning the history of your pain, you also learn the history of your resilience and the ways in which people dealt with similar pain and found ways to persist so that you could still live. So, I would say that, when I see things like the attempts to get rid of LGBTQ inclusive history at the Stonewall Monument, or to get rid of the Pulse Monument, we should reframe these things as also larger political strategies that want to keep queer and trans people unhealed. Because if we were to heal, what would happen, right? And there's a lot of people who benefit from keeping entire populations of people unhealed. Because what unhealed people do is self immolate and not actually come together and organize for a better world.
It's a lot to think about. Thank you. So, wow. Um, One of the things that I've heard you talk about before, Alok, and we've touched on a little bit in conversation this far, or so far, is the pressure that you were under to be successful. And I think that I know I have felt that. I'm certainly not a, twice graduated from Stanford kind of person, but which is its own special hell, I'm sure. But that pressure to like be everything somebody wants you to be, and you've said, you found art and you did that. But we have kids who will listen to younger people who will listen to this and are probably experiencing that same pressure right now of like, be what I've given you everything. Now be this. Is there simple advice that you would give to somebody who's, headed thinking about headed to college or maybe not, and there's a lot of pressure on them in the next year. Um, and that pressure is also they're a queer kid and they're living in this pressurized system of attack. Like, is it breathing?
Listen, I'm hardly the best representative of this. I'm in the trenches with everyone else. I feel a lot of pressure, but what's more painful is the worst pressure I have is self-imposed. In fact, I think a lot of people in my court who are like, "Hey, can you chill? Can you relax? Can you take a break? Can you take a beat? Can you just enjoy?" And I'm the one that's like, "No, no, 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 no. I have to keep running. I have to keep going. I have to keep pushing. I have to keep striving." And that comes from those shadows of childhood, this sense of feeling like I need to be exceptional, feeling like I have to overcompensate, be as industrious and effective as possible to correct for some kind of stain of being queer and not therefore being worthy. And I know these things psychologically, and I still find myself doing them. What I would say that as someone who's working through it too is what's less intense is what other people say and more what you believe. And so what I've had to really come to realize is like people are going to always have ideas of how you should be showing up in the world, but what you choose to believe and what you self-administer, that's what you can control. You can't actually control what people are going to say to you. You can control what you choose to believe and live your life through. And that is really scary because you have to take responsibility for your own wellness. And I think that's really hard for a lot of us, um, because it's easier, at least for me, to blame it on a system, blame it on this, blame it on, but to really take responsibility for my own healing and my wellness, I'm doing this to myself. It's deeply confronting because then it takes the arena of a thing like homophobia away from some strong man, and it's saying, oh, it's in me. I'm still moving from a place of unworthiness. I still look at my life and feel like it's not enough. That lens is in me. And rather than feeling shame about that, what I'm trying to do is to, of course, we are indented in systems that have taught us that we shouldn't be here. So of course we're going to believe these things. So what I'm trying to do now is offer myself grace. In the moments where I'm feeling judgment for being a workaholic, now I'm like, oh, of course I'm a workaholic. And something very different happens when I love the parts of me that still need to heal versus judging them. And in fact, I'm really glad that I still have stuff to heal because healing builds community. Because then I can be honest about my process with someone else and then they can share insight on their journey. If I had all the answers, I wouldn't need other people. And I feel like that would be kind of boring.
And lonely.
Yeah.
And lonely. So there is, I have one personal question. So it's personal because so Kate Clinton, I love Kate Clinton. I know Kate, and she and Irv at Creating Change were kind of a touchstone. And do you get to keep in touch with Kate still?
Hmm.
Yay! That makes me feel good. I see she's has been performing again, so that made my heart feel good too. Um, she is so funny. We've had her in Boulder a couple of times, and the old lesbians like me go wild. As we're coming to the end, we have some kind of like fun questions. I know this is, it's all been really good and deep and powerful, but come back into a little bit of fun. Where do you get all these amazing clothes? People want to know.
I really make a habit of finding incredible artisans all across the world, who are just designing bright, vibrant clothing. So I would say like small kind of indie designers are a lot of them based out of India. Um, and I'm always finding new ones. But I try to do due diligence of like tagging on Instagram where I'm wearing so
Good.
people can find out about
That's good. Thank you for that. I'm not kidding. People want to know. They've been saying, please make sure you ask them this.
them.
And so one of the things I had Kate Kendall, who's now at the Gill Foundation, on and asked this question, and I found a new artist that I wanted to listen to. So I want to ask you like the same question. Who are three artists that we should be checking out? Musical artists.
Yeah, sure. I was just on tour with my friend Whatever Mike, who's a non-binary Jewish singer who is so fun and a dear friend and a beautiful voice. Um, then I want to shout out this new duo I've been listening to, Hout and Freddie, Haute and Freddy, I believe. They make this kind of like synth poppy 80s inspired music that is really fun. And then
I'm learning things.
who's a third artist that I mean, there's so many beautiful ones. I'm going to be touring in Brazil in a few weeks, and one of my favorite musicians is a Black trans singer named Lineker, Linikeer, who sings these beautiful Portuguese ballads and
Mm.
is super great.
Wow. Thanks for those tips. How many languages do you speak?
Like 1.5.
Okay, good, good. Is there anything somebody we were as we were preparing to in our excitement to talk with you, you're good at a lot of things. And somebody shouted from the back, maybe ask them what they don't think they're good at.
Oh, I'm horrible at singing, really
Okay.
bad.
All right, now we know that one. We only wanted one thing, so that's good to know. And then who are the change makers? So like I'm aging out. Hopefully, they won't keep changing the Social Security date farther and farther out, so I get a little bit of free time before I die, or maybe I'll die before that. But who knows? Every day is a free day. But as I look at, we run youth programs here. We have youth interns. We have younger staff, and I'm so impressed by their work. Your work is global. You're, around the United States all the time in all the different places. Who do you think the change makers are in your generation that you're really paying attention to now?
Listen, there's so many,
Yeah.
and in every country, in every town, there's some incredible queen or king or queen doing the work. But what I would really say is the most powerful change is often done in quiet, and it's often done by people who aren't on social media or aren't building a persona. They're people who just show up because it matters and they care. And I've met so many incredible people who are just doing that and who don't even want the attention, who just care. I think a lot of times people feel immobilized from action because they're like, oh, I can't be like so and so, insert charismatic leader. And I don't think that charismatic leadership is the only form of leadership. I think that there's so many other ways to show up. And so, what I always encourage people is show up in the way that you feel fit. If you're an expert knitter, we need you. If you know how to make a mean peanut butter and jelly sandwich, we need you. Like
Yeah.
everybody's got a skill that they could bring in.
I completely agree with that. I say that to people a lot. Just bring your best and let's do it together.
Hmm.
And everybody has their own skill.
Hmm.
Alok, I am so honored to have been able to spend one on one time with you. And I'm so grateful for you sharing the brilliant, deep, meaningful thoughts. I, if you dream like this while you're awake, I can't even imagine how you dream when you're asleep. Those things, monitoring the brain, just must go off the chart. So I work with a crew of people who, like, I'm 60s, they're in their 20s and 30s, and you mean a lot to a lot of people, but you are helping people that I love uh, on a daily basis with your kindness, with your words, with your strength in being who you are in a world that fights for you not to be. And I'm grateful to you for all that and more. Folks in Boulder and surrounding Denver metro area, please come to the Boulder Theater on September 28th at 7 p.m. There's a few tickets that are still on sale, and I'm saying a few because I've looked. And you'll have an opportunity to see Alok in all their beauty and all their fun at the Boulder Theater. Alok, thank you so
We'll
much
see you
for
then.
joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Proudly Out of Line is brought to you by Rocky Mountain Equality, with help from your host, Mardi Moore, executive producer, Amy Zuckerman, audio producer, Theo Conover. Until next time.